Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Cheriel Brown. I am the owner of Third Person Omniscient Productions. However, first and foremost, I am a screenwriter. Therefore, I do have this channel so that I can talk about screenwriting topics, and primarily what I like to do is to point out different aspects of screenwriting and different tricks of the trade that can be gathered from watching the movies and television shows that are on TV and in the movie theaters currently. So what I want to talk about today is the movie American Son, and there are actually quite a few movies titled American Son. One of the ones that I really like is the one starring Nick Cannon from 2008, but the one I'm talking about tonight is the one starring Kerry Washington from 2019. And this particular movie, American Son, was adapted from the stage play. And the reason why I wanted to do this video about that particular film is because I remember watching the film and feeling like, oh, okay, was a pretty good play. Too bad I couldn't see it on stage. But then I went to the Internet Movie Database page for the movie, and I saw that the rating for the movie overall was a 5.7. So I was very curious to see why it was like smack dab in the middle. And I began to read the reviews that people wrote. And basically the movie got either, from most reviewers, a 9 or 10, which is like the highest that you could get, a 9 or 10, or they got the lowest points you can get, a 1 or 2. So I wanted to do a video addressing some of the criticisms that some of the reviewers who didn't like the movie had about it. Some of the feedback from some of the audience members actually made me think about it a little bit, and it affected this overall score that I ended up giving the movie, which I will tell you what that is when I finish discussing some of the points that I want to go over in this video. So I found from reading, like, the movie at the time that I looked at the page had about 6,000 reviews. And people were either just like thoroughly pleased with the movie, or they were highly disappointed with the movie. I saw a few reviews where people said that they usually don't leave reviews, but they had to leave a review because they were that disappointed with the film. I do want to point out that regardless of what the movie scored in ratings, a 5.7, it still got nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award. So that's a little bit of feedback that you should know about the film. Granted, I don't always believe that movies that win Oscars or Emmys, or that get nominated for Emmys or Oscars or Tonys, are necessarily the best work that happened that year. Sometimes these films get nominated because of who the person who made the movie knows, politics, all kinds of reasons why movies get nominated for awards. So you can't always just go by whether or not something got buzzed during award season. But I want to address 3 of the recurring complaints that people made about the movie American Son, the one that was starring Kerry Washington. So one of the complaints that I noticed about American Son was that Kerry Washington's character was unlikable. I just wanted to point out for that, when you are writing a play, which this movie is based on a stage play, so it's not going to have a lot of cinematic features that a movie usually has. It's not going to be very visual. The storytelling is going to come through the dialogue primarily, not by what you see on screen. That's the primary difference between a stage play and a screenplay. How visual it is, how much of the story gets told by what the characters are doing versus what the characters are saying. And when you have a play, there has to be constant tension. There has to be constant tension and constant conflict in speaking terms between the characters for it to, not get boring, basically. So the character that Kerry Washington played, it was argued that her character was unlikable. And I want to just address that. First of all, I want to say that if you have a character who's getting along with everyone and who's very pleasant, that is what actually makes for a very boring movie. The playwright was definitely focused on making sure that there was always constant tension and constant conflict. However, with that being said, I also want to throw in that the playwright was a man, and I personally believe that I can usually tell when female characters are created by and written by men. And I say that simply to say that when the female characters are really annoying and really over the top and almost unbearable, usually it's because that's how a man sees us as women. They see us as kind of nagging, irritating, and then that comes through in how they create characters. I feel that when women create characters, our characters are not annoying and they don't get on the audience's nerves. That's just my personal opinion. You can get mad at that if you want. It's just my personal opinion. You can take it or leave it. But I have noticed personally that a lot of times when female characters are unlikable and when female characters are annoying, it's because the playwright or the screenwriter was a man. And that's kind of how they see us. Which is why I like to have films and plays and everything that have the primary character or protagonist as a woman to be written by a woman. But that's just my personal opinion. I write characters and I write stories where the man might be the main character, and I don't want to be told that I can't write that because I'm a woman. So men can't be told that they can't create characters that are women. But that discrepancy is something that I've noticed, that when men create female characters, a lot of times those characters are annoying. Yes. But primarily her character was the way it was because there had to be constant conflict and tension. Okay, so that's one of the first things I wanted to address with the criticisms that I saw in the comments that were left in the reviews. Another thing I wanted to address in the reviews, another criticism that people had when they didn't like the film, they felt like the play was boring. Not the play, the movie was boring. And what I have to say for that is that it was based on a stage play. And it only had, the movie only had 4 characters because that's how many characters were in the play. And most of the time there were only 2 characters on stage at a time, or on screen for the adaptation. There were only 2 characters on screen at a time for the majority of the movie. So one of the persons had written that the movie was boring and it felt like a 90-minute argument. Well, what I have to say to that is that a play with 2 characters pretty much is a 90-minute argument. That's how plays are written. You don't have a lot of visual stuff going on. So it is based on the sparring back and forth, the banter back and forth between 2 characters. So, that was that person's opinion. Was it a valid opinion? Well, it was based on a play. So yeah, that's the result you get from a story based on a play, a 90-minute argument, because that's essentially what a play is. The third argument that I found that critics of the film had, and when I say critics, I don't even mean like people who do this for a living. These are the reviews that were written by people who watched the movie. This is the audience members talking here. And the last criticism was that Kerry Washington's character and the character who played her husband were having conversations about their mixed race son, who was, black from Kerry Washington's side and then white from his father's side. They were having conversations that the audience members felt like they should have already discussed prior to this incident happening, if they had been married for as long as they had been married. In the story, the 2 characters had been married for a very long time. They had recently separated because the husband was cheating on Kerry Washington's character, and he has been living outside of the home. But they had been together for about at least 17 or 18 years. I happen to agree with this criticism because I feel like if they had been married for as long as they had been married and they had a very healthy relationship initially, and they had a son, and they had stayed married for at least 17, 18 years, or at least 16, 17 years they've been married, they definitely would have discussed these racial issues about their son. They definitely would have, because the way that the story was put together, they had a pretty good relationship until the husband left. And I have a lot of friends that are different races. I have a lot of white friends. I've had romantic relationships with white people, and friendships with white people and other races. And when you're comfortable with somebody, you talk about race issues. That's just something that happens in a relationship naturally when you have those differences. however you feel comfortable with the person. If they had been in a relationship and they had been married, they would have talked about how race affected their son way before this night where they're trying to figure out what happened to their son and the police aren't giving them any answers. They definitely would have had these discussions prior to that. The way I would have fixed that issue as a writer, I wouldn't have had them be so close as a couple. I would have had them basically being like co-parents who didn't have a very close relationship with each other. If they had just been co-parenting because, you know, she got knocked up after a one-night stand, or they weren't really that close when she got pregnant, that would make more sense that they wouldn't have had these conversations about race, about their mixed race son. And that detail would have fixed the logic behind that storyline. Just basically putting them in a situation where they were co-parenting and not in an actual marriage where they trusted each other and felt comfortable. You would assume that they would have felt comfortable talking about those things, because those are things that would have needed to been discussed as soon as she found out she was pregnant. Okay, so I do agree with that third criticism. I feel like there could have been some changes to the backstory and the characters' relationship with each other to make it more feasible that they would have never discussed these issues prior to that night. Okay, so that's all I really have to say about the criticisms that were presented for American Son. I think that it's halfway valid that her character was kind of annoying, but not very valid, because you have to have conflict. She couldn't have been giving them an easy time. She had to give them a hard time for there to be some conflict going on. If you didn't have conflict, then that story would have really been boring. Okay, the second criticism, that the overall story was boring, again, that's not very valid to me, because it's based on a play, and that's how plays go. Plays are basically, like the person said, 90-minute arguments. And the third issue, I think, could have been addressed in the writing. It could have had some more feasibility, that the mixed race couple wouldn't have talked about these issues of race about their mixed race child if maybe they were co-parenting and hadn't been in a real relationship or a marriage that worked for 16 to 17 years, even if the father had left at that point. So that's all I have to say about American Son. If you haven't seen it, you can still check it out. It's still available on Netflix. And, make sure you stay tuned for the next video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you think that there are some other writers who might be benefited from watching this video, then share it out with them. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you disagree with me on anything, that's great. Leave it in the comments. If you agree with me, that's great too. Leave it in the comments. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for joining me. Bye guys. Have a great week.